So here is a final turntable and a few preview renders of this asset for now. I wanted to do a lot more rendering, but each frame takes about 30 to 50 minutes to render at 1920 by 1080. At the beginning of this course, my plan was to use a render farm to render this asset, but after getting an estimation of the cost, I think I'm going to let go of my plans for using a render farm. Rendering 600 frames of animation can cost well over 2,000 US dollars. For that kind of money, I can buy another machine and set it up as a render farm. Anyway, so this result you're seeing on screen is the end result of all the final work and troubleshooting I did in this lesson. This lesson starts with me addressing fixes from the last lesson, moves on to painting of the fluid mesh, and finishes with several iterations of reviews and fixes. You can use the chapter markers to jump to the parts of the lesson you are interested in. I've decided not to upload the Substance and ZBrush files to Patreon just yet. If you're on my Patreon and you are in the tiers that allow you to have access to this download, you will receive a .mb version of Maya, and if you've been following along with this course, I use Maya 2024, so you're going to at least need Maya 2024. I'll see if I can add a .ma file to see if that might be backward compatible. You might be able to open the .ma file in older versions of Maya, but if you can't, I'm also going to include an FBX version. Just be mindful of the fact that if you do get the FBX version, you might have to re-import the textures. You will have to reapply the textures. So just watch the videos and see what I did so you can reconnect them. Same applies if you want to use the FBX version in your own DCC like Blender or something. And if you're a Patreon member and you want the source files, shoot me a direct message on Patreon and I will upload the ZBrush and Substance files for you. But I've included almost everything you need. The project folder has variations of textures. You have the 3 different bun textures that I created. You have a version of the textures that doesn't include stains of one ingredient on the other. So they're all in subfolders inside the main project folder. So let's get along with this lesson and let me show you how I came to this final result. So the first thing I'm going to do is make the change to the value of the patty, the medium part of the patty. So to go to the medium rare part, go to its color, and I want a higher value. So I'm going to just go up. Much. That's really bright, so I'll see how that turns out. And another thing I've decided to do is stop worrying about how these different elements will survive on their own and make sure it works well as the final cohesive product. What I will perhaps do is provide an additional set of maps that doesn't have one element bleeding into the other. That way, if you take it apart, you can use each piece without the stains of the piece on top of it on it. But because I have gone ahead and put meat juice on this bottom sauce and on this cheese, I'm also going to bleed the sauce and cheese onto the top patty. And I'm going to do the same thing here and bleed cheese onto the bottom patty. So I'm going to add a layer, or I'll just duplicate this one. Add a black mask. I'll call it cheese sauce bleed or transition. Or what I could actually do is just provide you guys with this substance file. So if you don't want these bleeds, you can just come in, turn them off, and re-export the textures. So I will provide the substance file for my Patreon members who will have access to this. So I'm going to pick, I'll start with the cheese, and I'll just sample a color from the cheese and use the same brush I used. I used Dirt 2. Looks pretty nice. And actually, this is just for the cheese. It would be a separate layer for the sauce. All right, and now it's time to do it for the sauce. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, add a black mask, add a paint layer, and do it for the sauce. All right, now I'm going to touch these onions. So I'm going to use the same brush, add a black mask, paint layer. And what I really want to do is pick this dark color in my reference for this char and get some information at the base of these onions. And perhaps I should use my cement brush. Let me isolate these. I don't want to get it on the whole thing, and I definitely want some gradation, because I do like that subsurface scattering just on the not charred part. I'm going to duplicate this layer, add a black mask, add a paint, and pick a darker purple and just use a spray brush to get some more interesting detail on top or either underneath. I'll see where it works best. Let me try dots. Let's see what Dirt 3 does. I think it needs to be darker. Yeah, like that. It's another tier of color. Make the color map react a lot better with the SSS. Okay, that's good. And then the next thing I want to do is for the parts of the onions that are on the cheese, I'm going to do the same blending effect. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, add a black mask, add a paint layer, pick my cheese, and use my Dirt 2 brush to get some of this cheese on here, to get some of that cohesion. Call it cheese bleed transition. All right, we could use some here. Actually, for the bottom side, we could use some sauce. So I'll come back and get that. Let me get this side. Be careful for the part of it that's not really sitting on there. Not get too much on there. About that much feels good. Okay. So another thing that I don't think I've done a particularly good job with is how these pieces of charred meat are blending with the surfaces they're on. The pieces of charred meat on the cheese are doing a little bit better than the ones on the sauce at the bottom. But at the bottom, these are very similar patterns, similar shapes. And I might even have to go in Maya and delete some of these geometries to make a more randomized distribution of these pieces. But for now, what I want to focus on doing before I go deleting stuff is just making sure that it blends in just a little bit better. So I'm going to add another pass here. I'm going to duplicate this personality pass. Call this better blending. And I'm going to pick this exact color this time. And add a black mask. Add a paint layer. And then come in here and try to do a better job of letting them blend and getting different shapes. So I'm going to go a little bit darker so that they really mix well. Because these ovoid shapes are just not going to do it. They just look too weird. It doesn't look natural at all. If even I have to connect shapes like this, this is good. Just have to lose that ovoid look. All right, now I'm going to do it on the bottom bun. Okay, so that appears to be it so far for the paint fixes. I think it's good. I'm going to come to this onion and do a little bit more of this painting of cheese over here. I think it looks good. So take the smooth normals and do some blending. All right, so this is the first pass of paint fixes. It may also be the last. I'm going to reserve judgment until I see what I have. But I'm going to push all these new textures out, and then I'm going to move on to the SSS scale map. Go File, Export, and I'll be back so we can work on the SSS scale. All right, so I'm going to get started with the SSS map for the cheese first. So whilst I was in Maya, I played around with a few renders, and I realized that a good number for the cheese, as far as SSS scale is concerned, is a 0.1. The last renders I did, it was at a 1, but a 0.1 is perfect. It looks really nice. So I'm going to group all of these layers for the cheese. Make sure I label it base color. And I'm going to duplicate it, call this SSS scale. And I'm going to come in here and really flatten this layer. There's a lot of stuff in here that's not worth anything. So I'm going to delete the base layer that comes from the aeocentric shading. That's not necessary. And this one too. And I'm actually going to start hiding these. We're not going to need all of them, but we do need some of them. Make sure I hide this. And this layer, I'm going to add a white mask to it so that it fills in with a solid color. And this is going to be my 0.1. So I'm going to desaturate it and set it to a value of 0.1. And now when it comes to all the things that are sitting on top of it, let me make sure what they are. All of these layers. This is not needed because this is a blending of sauce on here. And it could also have that 0.1 SSS scale. So I'm going to hide it for now. And I'm going to make sure I set all of these to a pure value of black to say they have no SSS scale. This way, all the painted personality and charred meat on top does not have any SSS scale. And if it looks weird, I'll come back and play with some of these values. But for now, I think a value of 0 is best. So if I turn this back on, I have something like that. So the cheese has 0.1. All these little charred meat that has been painted on the cheese has nothing, SSS scale of 0. Now I'm going to move on to the patties. And with the patties, I realized that an SSS scale of 1 is fine, right? It works really well. It adds some more coloring, which makes it more interesting. So I'm going to go with 1, and you're going to see what I'm talking about, but it looks really nice. I'll show a comparison. So I'll go to the patties and grab all these layers, group them, call them base color, duplicate the layer, SSS scale. I'm gonna come here and start gutting some of this stuff. I'm gonna hide this layer, add a white mask here so I can set the SSS scale to a pure value of 1. I also want to point out that previously when I blurred a pass of my personality pass and put it underneath my color, I got rid of that because I didn't like it, so I just hid it. So that's what you just saw me delete on this SSS scale layer. All right, so a lot of these passes are not needed. I'm going to start removing some of them. The cheese, I don't think is needed. Can remove that. These I have to be very careful with because they're charred meat pieces. So I'm going to strip them of their value, set the value to a pure black so we have no SSS scale, just like I did with the cheese. I have to be very careful with this pass. This pass is my charred wine red. I'm going to make sure I delete that. This is only intended for, actually even this should not be altered. This should also have an SSS of 1. No, I think it's the darker wine color, so it shouldn't be played with. The darker charred color. So I'm going to get rid of that. Just delete it. If I ever want it back, it's down here in the base color. I can go get it. And this pass, yeah, this yellowish transition needs to also go away. So that leaves just this, right? These charred meat pieces, and then the actual main patty. All right, so that's the SSS scale for that. And then when we come down to the bottom bun, this one is going to be a little bit more complicated. I found out that a 1 for the sauce is great, but for the bread, I want a 0.5. So I want it transitioning from 0.5 to 1. And I'm going to have to be very careful about how I deal with this. Let me first group this, call it the base color, hide the base color. All right, so let me dig into this and see what I need and what I don't need. So I'm going to start off by getting rid of this this multicolor layer. Don't need that. This looks like my bun. If I take a look at the mask, yes, this is the bun. So I could potentially, well, this is also the bun, so they're collective. And since I want the bun to be 0.5, I could just come over here and set this to 0.5 and do the same thing for this. This is the really great thing about painting with this non-destructive approach. You just have to change values to get your other maps. This aocentric shading, for the bottom bun, let me see what of it is needed. I think that I'm going to take this part of it and make sure that it behaves like sauce. So this is the transitionary stuff I painted, and I want it to be a transition between the bun and the sauce, but I think it will fare well if it just had an SSS scale of 1. Let me see if that's gonna work. No, that might be too much. Yeah, because it's a pretty dominant. Yeah, that might be too much. I don't think I should even use it. I think I'll stay away from it. Yeah, that might be too much. So I'll just leave that out and move to this layer. So this sauce layer. And yeah, this aocentric shading, I'm just going to add a white mask so that it fills in. And I'm going to set it to 1. Yes, like that. And let me move on to the next layer. Yeah, this is also definitely going to be a 1. And let me see what this is. Yeah, same thing here. This is going to be an SSS scale of 1. And the charred meat, this is where I have to be careful. This has to be 0. So I'm going to come over here, make sure it's an SSS scale of 0. And I think this is more of that stuff. This is the meat that's transitioning from the top. I think it could also be 1 because the meat SSS scale is 1. So I'm going to set this one to 1. And the cheese transition, I guess that doesn't matter that much either. I'll just set it to 1. It's not a big deal. So I have very small pockets of this thing that is bun, and it's peering through, and I think it's going to look good as 0.5 and 1. Okay. So then the next one to deal with is the onions. So I'm going to go to the onions, group this as the base color, duplicate it, all this SSS scale. Now this fill layer looks to be my multicolor layer. I don't know why it's not. Yeah, that's my base multicolor. Let me leave that for now. Look at my aocentric shading. I think what I'm going to do is focus on getting these darker ones. This one, for instance, this pure black char, to have an SSS scale of nothing. And then every intermediary tone, like this one, is the shading I did on top of this. I'm going to give it a 0.5 SSS scale. And maybe a 0.5 is too much. Let me try. Make sure it goes into. Let me just come down a little bit. Just manually pick a hue from here. And then I think with this part of it, this is the base. It should be, let me just add a white mask so that it's fully present. And I'm going to clear this multicolor layer and just set it to 1. So I have an SSS scale of 1. And I think that's going to be good. I think that's going to work really well. The aeocentric shading. I think that could go away. I don't think it's important. It's a little bit too much going on here. The cheese, I'm also going to set it to a 1. And actually, I should be very careful with this. This should definitely come down a little bit more. Yeah, to about there. So we have a good balance. And to be perfectly honest, I probably should go in there and do a little bit more painting here. I don't think, I don't trust having that bright of a hue. All right, so this is our SSS scale. I can hide this top sauce now because it's never going to be exported. Things like this could go away. At this bottom bun here, I think this mask here might have been coming from here, so I'll get rid of it. Yeah, and this might need to be filled in. Okay, so yeah, this is the initial SSS scale. I actually did forget one thing, and that's the charred pieces of meat. And they are going to be very simple. It's just no SSS whatsoever. So I'm going to delete that and just set them to black. All right, so this is the SSS scale finished. I'm not going to worry about the roughness for now, because I think that's something I can do last. The roughness are simple maps. They're going to be singular maps. They're not going to be too interesting, just like I did with the top sauce and the cucumber. So it's just going to be one flat material, one flat UV tile. And because of that, I'm even going to reduce the size as I did with the top sauce. So they'll be really small. They could be 128 by 128 because they're just going to be one color. And again, the only reason why I'm going to provide roughness maps instead of using the dial is so that you have all the maps you need to assemble this thing in any application without having to go and change dials to get things to look the way I intended. So you will get maps for everything, so everything can have a connection. All right, so I'm going to export this and we'll move on to the next step. It's now time to deal with these fluid meshes. Before I see any of these renders, I want to get the fluid meshes in there and paint the basic things I need for them so I can make an analysis of everything together. So what I'm going to do is export these fluid meshes to the FBX preparation rooms that I created to send stuff from Maya to Substance. But before I send the fluid mesh, I have to create the second one. And the second one is the one I've discussed quite a few times. It's the one that's going to be sitting on top of the cucumber and the top sauce. So to create that, I'm going to isolate this. I only want it on one. I'm going to let the other one be because it has enough sauce on it. for a good transition. But what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to turn them into a live mesh. Okay. And now that they're live, I'm going to go to the modeling tool, take the quad draw tool, and start plotting some points and filling in to create this transitionary mesh. This is just a really basic. I'm going to start getting it all around. Select this edge, run extrude, and pull this thing out. And then I can go back into my quad draw tool, and it should allow me to, let me turn off live. Isolate these again, turn live back on, select this, go to my quad draw, and moving this should now allow it to snap onto the surface. I could just go into the smooth. I'll hold down shift and smooth just to get it to relax with soft selection on. And it should wrap around nicely. Let me add some more edge loops here. Yeah, that doesn't look bad. More smoothing. And I'm going to also attempt another extrude, but this time in the quad draw tool. I'll hold down tab and hold the middle mouse button and just go a little higher just to be safe, just to get some height on this thing. And I think this should be good. Let me move things around a little. So let me get out of the quad draw tool. Select this mesh, hold down shift, right click, go smooth, and apply one iteration of smooth. I think this is also something I could have done in the quad draw tool just to ensure that it wraps around correctly. So I'm going to come in here and hold down shift and do some smoothing just so it wraps around it better. And I'm going to fix some of these all right, so now that we have this result, there is something I have to take into consideration. You see, all these meshes in the viewport, what they're showcasing is not their true thickness. Their true thickness happens at render time when the displacement map is applied. So I have to consider that this transition mesh I've created is not going to be sitting directly on top of the meshes at render time. So I have to make sure I account for that thickness. So I'm going to duplicate this surface just so I have the original, hide it, and then run an extrusion, find it, and just pull it out a bit to about there. All right, this is about a safe, I feel like is a safe position. If it's not, I'm going to have to come and make some alterations. That's a lot of extrusion, so I'm going to be on the more conservative side, and worst case scenario, I just have to come out and pull some of it out so that it is sitting on top of the mesh properly. right, a lot of this side that's a little bit too high, we'll have an opacity map feathering it out. All right, so with the outer selection selected, which I want, I'm just going to go select inverse to get the inside part of it. Well, it looks like that's not going to be that easy. Let me see. Select inverse. All right, it won't do that. Let me create a quick select set. See if that works. So go create sets, quick select set, add to the shelf, and get out of here. Select it and then go inverse. All right, there's another way I can go about this. I'm going to go UV and go planar with what's selected. And then I'll go into the UV editor. And this is what I want. And the rest of them I just don't want. So I can just select all of these and delete them. And that's our fluid mesh. But now it has to be UV'd and put on the appropriate tile. Let me make some changes here. All right, so now I'm going to bring everything back and make sure it has the same textile density as the fluid mesh it's going to be sharing a tile with. So I'm going to select that fluid mesh and I'm going to go to transform and get its textile density and then set it for this one. Okay, so that's the appropriate size. And now I'm going to grab the edges and cut it up. So I'm going to go into the cut tool and do a cut and unwrap this, unfold it first, optimize it. And let me see what I have. Let me actually go into UV mode, UV editing mode, so I can do this better. Yeah, it looks like I could cut it again. So I'm going to cut it right in the center. Go cut. Select these UV shells, unfold, optimize. Yeah, and they're fine. Make sure I have them facing the right direction before I position them. Yeah, and now I'm going to find a place on this tile for them to exist. They're going to be fine. One can be there and the other one can be there. Okay, so that's it. That's this transitionary mesh, and I can assign it the same material that the fluid mesh has. All right, so that's these two items. The weird thing now is that they're going into different files because this one needs to be in the paint room that the cucumbers and the top sauce was in, and this one needs to be in the paint room that we're in right now, painting everything else. So I'm going to export these as separate object files, and I'll come back with the corresponding files to prepare them to send them to Substance. So I'll just export as OBJ. I'm actually also going to make one update. I do have another fluid mesh down here, and somehow I put it really far away on tile 3. And since I'm now putting everything on the same tile, I think I could just take this and move it onto that one tile, just so we have all the fluid meshes on one tile. And I think it can fit. I think it's going to be too big of a problem. Yeah, it might have to be sliced a bit. So I'm going to make some cuts here. cut that. This doesn't need to really go to substance. It's fine. It just needs to use whatever transmission settings everything is set to. So there you have it. Those are our 3 fluid meshes all on one tile. And I think that's it. I don't think I had another fluid mesh anywhere. Yeah, this really scattered one is on tile 2. And it looks like I put that third one on the third tile, but I think it's fine now. It should be fine. All right, so this is the patty cheese bottom sauce file. I'm going to import its fluid mesh in here. All right, so that's the fluid mesh. And I'm going to assign it a material, a new material. And I'll just give it a Lambert. And I'll use the same naming convention I use for the other stuff. Main fluid mesh matte. All right, then I'm going to select all of this and push it out as an FBX, and so that we can re-import it into Substance and see if the updates ruin anything. All right, I'm going to do the same for this top sauce and cucumber file. I'm going to import the fluid mesh I just created for it. Okay. Assign it a material. All right, and I'm going to export this also as an FBX. All right, I'm going to start with the main one and make sure it gets in here with no problems. So I'm going to resort back to my color pass for all of these. It looks like when I was creating the SSS scale for the charred meat, I just discarded its color information, which was stupid. So I just went back to a previous file and saved it as a smart material so I can drag it back in here, just so we have the color in the main file. All right, so I have all my color layers turned back on in my main file, and now it's time to update the FBX that this substance file is reading and see if it's going to bring in this fluid mesh with no problems and leave everything else intact. So I'm going to go edit, project configuration, and I should be able to just select my new FBX export. This is the one where I renamed the bottom bun. I'm going to go open, go okay. Yes, it looks like everything is good. Came in with no issues. The charred meat, everything still preserved its color information. And we should have a new material in here somewhere. That one right there. So this is a fluid mesh. So the first thing I'm going to do is enable transparency in Substance so that I can paint this thing while seeing what's behind it. So I'm going to come over here, and on my main shader, the first main shader I selected, I'm going to switch that over to PBR with alpha blending right there. And it shouldn't break anything. Now I have to come into the texture settings, and on these channels, I have to add a transparency, actually no, an opacity channel right there. Okay, not transparency. So with opacity now there, I can alt click opacity, and now I should be able to add a black mask. And now, unfortunately, to proceed, I would have to go into this mode. If I was to add a white mask, yeah, so now I have full transparency, and I think this is how I'm going to proceed. So I'll have full transparency and then I'll be painting in, well, at least for my transmission weight that I'm about to paint. I'm going to go over how I'm going to deal with the maps that I have to paint. For this will definitely be my transmission weight map. So let me label it transmission weight. But the first thing I do want to paint is a opacity map to feather the edges. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate this layer and I'm going to add a black mask. And with this particular layer, I don't care for this opacity setting. I don't need it. I don't need to see what's underneath to be able to paint this opacity map. So I'm just going to stick with a color map here. So if I just add a white mask and I hide this one underneath, this will be my edge feathering. And I just need this so I can just paint these edges the color they need to be. I know that this one I can do in base color, so I can do that. But I think it's best if I do it in material here. Right, and I'm just going to be coming in here. I'm going to add a paint layer. And I'm going to be painting these edges black and stagger them a bit so I don't have a perfect line. But I'm not going to start with this one. This one is more complicated. There's more complicated things to paint here. So I'm just going to save this file and move on to the fluid mesh for the cucumber. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to re-import that FBX. So I'm going to go project configuration and I'm going to select my new FBX file that includes the fluid mesh. All right, so I am going to grab this fluid mesh texture set, add a fill layer. I don't need this layer. And this is also the edge feathering. So I start with a pure white value. So this is me just telling it I want full opacity for everything. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a white mask and then I'm going to paint in, add a paint, and I'm going to feather this edge. So I think it's best for this if I switch to material, make things a little bit easier to see, or perhaps I could stay on base color and just turn on wireframe. Yeah, that should be fine. All right, so with my paint layer selected, I'm going to grab a brush, probably use my dirt, see how well that works. So I need to be painting the inverse. Yeah, and I'm going to paint this edge a darker should probably try a more prominent brush. And actually, based off of what I'm doing, I really should add another layer underneath here and just make it black. This is just one way to approach it. That's why I was having issues. And I suppose now I can use my dirt brush. And basically just erasing. Go into the texture set settings and set this to a higher value so I can see a better resolution of what I'm painting. Yeah, this is good. So we're just going to go around and paint this feathered edge. All right, so that's it. This is all the work that needs to be done for this transition mesh. So basically where it's black, we're going to have transparency, and where it's white, we're going to have an opaque mesh. But because it's going to have a full transmission weight of 1, this is all going to be transparent properties. So transmissive properties are going to peer through this white area. So I'm going to export this, and I'll move into the other file to start preparing that mesh's fluid mesh. All right, I'm going to get started on the feather mesh, or our opacity mesh in this one. So I'm just going to do the same thing that I did before. I'll make sure I should group this because of the way I'm doing it. I'm going to add a fill layer, and underneath it, I'm just going to set this to black so that it peers through, and then I'll paint my edge feathering here. So I'm going to use the same dirt brush. Here, I want to be very careful though, because I don't want to eliminate so much of this mesh. I barely have enough of it draping off the meat, and I just don't want to go too far in. So I'm going to be very careful with the feathering. And there's a particular area where I don't really want to mess around with it too much, which is the really good area. Every once in a while, I'm going to check for that area. I think it's somewhere around the front here. Yeah, over here, there's a very good way in which the fluid mesh is draping. I made that change by pulling it off the surface, so it feels very natural here. I don't want to mess around with it too much, so I'm going to hide this. And try to stick really up here with the feathering. Here too, I'm going to go in the texture set and increase this to, I suppose, 4K so I can see better. All right, so that's it. That's the feathering of the fluid mesh. So this one is done too. Let me go to base color, see what it looks like. Clean this up a bit. I'm just going to take a solid brush, my basic soft, just go over these edges carefully, because at the very edge I really don't want any of this peering through. So at the edges I just want to be safe. I want the interesting detail at the transition point, but these edges should be completely obscured. So I'll probably go do it to the cucumber one too. All right, that's it. This should be good enough. I'm going to now push this out. Before we start painting this transmission weight map, I just want to review something that I talked about in lesson 11. In lesson 11, I went over a very elaborate approach of using transmission to exclusively represent the fluid that is mixed with the cheese. And the way I was going to do it is I was going to rely on transmission depth and transmission scatter and transmission color collectively to shade the portions of cheese. Now, this is a viable approach and it will work as I explained, because I did some tests. If you remember, I had these images here where I was testing with a black and white gradient going from 0 to 1, and I was able to show how you can get a consistent fluid or an opaque fluid all the way down to a fully transparent fluid. So this is a cool approach, and the great thing about it is that it relies exclusively on transmission settings, so you don't have to worry about other shading settings, I think, other than roughness, other than specular roughness. But most of the work is done within the transmission section. But this is not the approach I'm going to take. I'm going for the approach that I used with the cucumbers. If you remember, in the cucumber lesson, what I focused my attention on was painting a window into transmission that would represent the clear fluid. And then for the rest of the cucumber, I rely on the main shader properties to shade the opaque part of the cucumber. So SSS, base color, roughness, specular, and pretty much everything that the shader has accessible to it will be allocated to painting the opaque part. And then transmission just has to worry about the transmissive part, or the fluid part. This does mean that you're using the power of transmission and you're using all the complex shader properties like SSS. So I assume this one is a little bit more of an expensive approach, but it's also a reliable approach, and it requires less maps. I think I'm going to be able to achieve what I need with less maps. So I just wanted to give this little brief before I started painting, because I want you to know that even though lesson 11 was informative, and I think it's, if you go to lesson 11, you should be able to access that entire spiel. It's right here. It's transmission testing results. So you should be able to access it. It's at 336. All right. So if you're interested, just go check it out. All right. So it's time to get started painting this transmission weight. So what I'm looking to do is get various depths or various thicknesses of liquidated cheese. And I'm mostly going to be shooting for the transition points because I want all these ingredients to marry well together. So I will be cheating in some instances and overdoing it at the points where I feel like it's needed to make this piece feel cohesive. Specifically, these 4 pieces that the fluid mesh drapes over. So I'm going to take a look. You're going to see me doing things like this. I want this really abstract shapes with bubbles in them. So I'll be simulating those bubbles. And I think I've seen a good alpha that is going to help me at least lay down something to get started with. All right, so let's get started with the painting of this transmission map. The way I'm going to set it up so that it can benefit me visually in substance is weird, but just bear with me. So I'm going to start with a fill layer, and I'm going to make sure the opacity is set to black, full black, so it's fully transparent. Then I'm going to add a black mask. Okay, so that fills in with full white because it's kind of like deactivating what I did on over here. Then I'm going to add a fill layer. Make sure it's set to 1. And then on top of that, I'm going to add a paint layer. And then I'm going to hit X, and I'm going to be introducing my paint information with black like this. Right, so this just allows me to see these transition points. And I picked this Kyle spatter brush in substance. I think the one next to it is also good because it has that bubble-like feel. It has these circular shapes in there, and I think it's a good starting point. So this is how I'm going to get started painting this cheese, at least for the transition points that I wanted at. All right, I think I'll change brushes and get more interesting shapes later. So let me go through and get started. So I'm going to introduce this at some of these transition points. And this particular shapes, I want to see it mostly down here. This is going to be a little bit more of a more complex painting session, so it's not just going to be one application. I'm going to come back and play around. All right, now I'm going to get it one application of this between the top patty, and I'm going to come in here and erase a lot of this. Just need an initial application. Whatever gets on the edge is fine because we have our opacity map that's going to feather it nicely. Alright, so that's an initial pass. And now I'm going to come up here and grab my cement brush and start blotting in add a new paint layer. I'll put everything on a separate paint layer so that I can come in control. Yes, I'm going to start putting in these little pockets that are going to be my liquidated cheese, and they're supposed to flow. So I should actually use cement too, because again, I like the varied intensity that it provides. All right, so this is tended to work like a marrying agent. And these areas where it transitions, for the bottom patty, I do want a fair amount of this cheese, liquidated cheese, flowing down. Now I'm just trying to make sure I don't have like these weird islands. So I'm going to try to marry it all together. All right, so this is enough for now. I think this is a good starting point. I'll go see what this yields. Let me mix this in. I really should have put this on a separate layer, but it's fine. Yeah, it looks pretty nice. I might find out that I just have too much. We'll see. I think it's gonna transition well. All right, so this is what the export looks like. This looks about right. Everywhere that's white is going to be transmission. Everywhere that's black is going to be non-transmission, and it's going to be the responsibility of the shader or the other properties of the standard surface shader to color, which is exactly what I want. Now I used one of my presets, a preset that I've made to export opacity, and it's just one channel added that pushes opacity grayscale out. So that's what I've picked for export here. It's a preset for one of my character models, and that's how I pushed it out. All right, the last thing I'm going to paint before I start testing all these painted maps is the transmission weight for my onions. I'm not going to go with this complicated setup because it's too much, and I don't really need it for what I plan on painting for the onions, but I did need it for this because I wanted to see underneath, and I want to be able to make some good choices about how things blend. I more than likely come back and alter this map, but let's move on. So onions, and I'm going to isolate them because I only want these ones, not the charred ones sitting on the outside. So I'm going to create a fill layer, group it, call this transmission weight. And this one is going to be a lot simpler. Basically, white will be anything that I want to be, again, transmissive. And then what I'm going to paint on top of it is I'm just going to introduce a black. And this one doesn't have to be that complicated. So I'm just going to go over here, pick a black color, and make sure up top I'm actually not going to go with a full transparency. I'm going to stay around here. So maybe like a 0.85. And then I'm just going to introduce, add a white mask and just introduce the underlying white with my cement 2 brush, which has become one of my favorite brushes. So okay, let me hit X. Yeah, just start introducing the underlying at different depths, and it doesn't all have to be the same. Okay, that looks good. And I'm actually going to take this black color, and I also want to make sure that it's not a full black. So just have just a little bit of not fully opaque. So we do have some minor transparency even in the black areas. So that's it. And this is transmission weight map. I'm going to push this one out too and come back in Maya. So it's time to wire all these maps in. All right, I'm in Maya and I'm going to start loading in these maps. I'm going to start with the SSS scale. I'm going to go file, go texture, and this is the SSS scale for the patties. Turn off filter. Well, patties SSS scale. Open. Make sure I set it to raw. Turn on alpha as luminance because this is a black and white map. And since the channels have the black and white information, I'm just going to grab the red channel. Any one of them would be fine, and wire it into the subsurface scale. Right there. And I do want to make sure that this is set to UDIM, so it loads in all of this stuff, and alpha's luminance has to be checked. So I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of them, and I'll be back to set up the next set of maps. All right, so now the next set of maps that I'm going to load in are my opacity maps, but I do realize that I might have done something that is going to cause a problem. So I put this new fluid mesh and this on the same tile. So if I go to UV editor, they are on the same tile, but the way they're exported puts them on their unique tiles. So that's not really good. So what I'm going to do is what I should have probably done when I created this new fluid mesh for the cucumbers. I'm just going to grab the UV shells for the cucumbers, and then I'm going to go into my transform, and I'm going to move it 1 unit so that it occupies the next tile. This shouldn't alter too much. I should be fine. What I do need to do is go on the file system and make sure I label this correctly so that the map I exported from Substance reads as 1002. So this is what I'm talking about. I gave them separate names. So this is for the main fluid mesh. This is opacity map for that one. This is the opacity map for the new fluid mesh for the cucumbers and the sauce. So I just have to make sure they're called the same thing. So I'm going to call them fluid mesh opacity .1002. And I just need to make sure that the main one has the same name, but it's 1001. So this is for tile 1, this is for tile 2. So if I go back into Maya now and open my Hypershade, I can load in these files as UDIM sequence. Set it to raw, and because it's a black and white map, it's going to be alpha as luminance, and pipe in the entire color into opacity. And I think I should be fine. So we'll see how well that works with the fluid mesh. It should have feathered the edges. Next thing I'm going to load in is the transmission weight maps. So I'm going to go File. That is really just one map, so it doesn't matter. I don't really need a UDIM sequence. I can just load it in, set it to raw. Alpha is luminance, and that goes into transmission. Any one of these channels and wire it in there. So we have it in here. I'm going to do the same thing for the onions because they also have a transmission weight map. All right, so that's everything that was painted, wired in, and I'm going to do my first set of renders to see what I get. Even the charred meat has its SSS scale, everything is ready. So I'll be back with renders so that I can start breaking them down and seeing what's wrong and what needs to be repaired. Okay, so these are the results from this first rendering with the newest changes. One thing that seems to be working properly now is as far as the color fixes is concerned, the bottom half of the patty looks correct now. I like the value it has. Probably could go a little lighter because it's really light here in some parts, like almost really light. There's a huge contrast. So I probably could increase that value just a little bit more to see what that's going to yield. Yeah, it really has to go up. And another thing I'm seeing as far as color mistakes is this little bleed thing. It looks like I should have gone under there and really painted the bleed well, because there is a gap and it looks a little weird because the meat is showing through. So I do need to go and paint a little bit closer and perhaps maybe even reduce how much paint is bleeding onto the patty. Now, this initial transmission map is good. I just needed to get a good inspection of what was happening so I can decide how to move forward. The opacity feathering is working well. It's feathering the edges so you can barely see the edge. So that's a good thing. All the SSS scales are working as expected. Now all these charred pieces of meat have the right color. They might be a little too dark, so that might be something that needs to change. Their value needs to go up a little bit. So I'll take that into consideration. But the biggest problem is this. This was a little reckless of me to think I could just do this mesh without preparing it properly. You see, this mesh is sharing a UDIM tile with this fluid mesh. So this fluid mesh that I just created is sharing a UDIM tile with this fluid mesh. And this fluid mesh relies on a displacement map from ZBrush. So because this is on the second tile and it doesn't have a displacement map telling it what to do, it doesn't know what to do. So I have to create a displacement map for this. And I'm not going to go do it in ZBrush. First, I'm going to try to just create one manually. So here is the one displacement map we have, and it's just one tile, right? That's why 001 is for the main fluid mesh. I'm going to duplicate it. So I'll do Control-C, Control-V. And with my second one, I'm going to name it 2. And all I really want this to do, it doesn't really have to have that much information. It just needs to be able to tell the fluid mesh on the second tile, don't do anything, just be black. And now this displacement map is one, I believe my displacement maps are using a mid value of 0. So doing nothing, I think, might be a pure black. So let me open it in Photoshop to inspect. I'll open as alpha channel. Okay, so this is the map. All right, so it looks like my displacement map was baked with a mid value of 0.5. I do remember doing that. So the midpoint to have no displacement would be 0.5, I believe. So I should be able to take just a 0.5 value. Let me try to pick, let me go to B here, which would represent value, and set it to 50 and go okay. And let me fill in. I think there's a little bit of color in here that should be stripped out. Make sure that this is 50. Okay, so that should be good. I believe so. So I'm going to merge layers. And so this should be our displacement map for the second tile. And we're going to see what that does. I don't think it's going to, I think it's going to do exactly what it needs to do, which is just leave the displacement unaffected. There's no displacement information here. So I'm going to shut that down. And then the next thing I'm going to do, this for sure, I'm going to have to go back and do some additional painting. But one of the first things I'm going to do is pick a color. So let me save this. And I'm going to minimize and pick a color for this cheese. So this will be the responsibility of my fluid meshes base color parameter. So I'm going to select my fluid mesh, and I'm going to sample this color value right there from my image. So I'm going to go here and sample that color. Looks like. Yeah, it's not bad. It's a good place to start from, but I think it might be just slightly off. Let me modify this color by myself by desaturating a little bit. Go into the yellow spectrum a little bit. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is, because it's important that it kind of matches my cheese, because this really is liquidated cheese, I'm going to sample this cheese color. Yeah, like that. And then I'm going to work to desaturate it. Yeah, very strong, but I think I'm heading in the right direction with what I needed to do. Still feel like it's fairly saturated. Okay, I'm going to stick with this for now. And then what I'm really going to do is go back into Substance Painter now and reduce its opacity, right? Because it's really strong. It's definitely not going to be this strong. So I needed to come down. I just wanted to see where it was. And I'm also going to do some painting to tone it down in some of these areas. But to start off with, I do want to reduce the opacity. I'm going to stop this in Maya and go into Substance. Go to my fluid mesh, go to materials. There it is. Okay, so I'm gonna grab this paint pass and start reducing the opacity. So I'll go with a 40 and do the same for the one up top. I'll go with a 40. All right, so this is a good starting point. And then I'm going to make sure it's inverted, and I'm going to push this out and do a re-render with this new map. Other thing I have to also do is deal with this value that I want to increase. So I'm going to go to the patties, go to the base color, and go back to this medium rare part and increase the value yet again. Okay, so that's a value hike. I'm also going to make sure I go to this raw pass now, which means that its value should also go up to really show that pinkish part of the meat, the really raw part. Okay, so this is going to go up to, and I'm going to push a new color map for this. And then another thing I have to do concerning the displacement is to set Arnold displacement settings for this mesh. So I'm going to go into the, let me actually delete history on it too, because it has a lot of geometry history. I'm going to the shape node, under displacement, and put in under Arnold subdivision. Make sure it's set to Cat Clark. Give it a few subdivisions, maybe 3. Actually, let me just do 4 to be on the safe side. Let me make sure the displacement settings are matched. Linear. Make sure the mid value is set to 0.5. Now this mesh does have 2 shape nodes. I don't know why that's the case, but just to make sure I repair that, I'm going to export it as an OBJ and bring it back in because I don't want that. I don't want 2 shape nodes. It's messy. Assign it its correct material. And go back in. So this should be fine. This should work now. I hope so. Once that is done, it's time to figure out the coloring and make sure that this is not receiving any of the coloring. So to do that, I have to define the color. But that's why I'm first doing this testing to see which color is going to work best down here. Once I figure that out, I'll just create UDIM maps with flat color values to plug into these two. This will be nothing, Claire, or white, and this will be whatever this variation of cheese color is. So I'll be back with the renders so we can see. All right, so it looks like the displacement issue for the second fluid mesh is working now. It just needs the rest of its information. This color would have to be removed, as I mentioned before. I'll deal with it after I figure out what's going on here. And it's looking like it's interesting. I do think maybe the feathering might need to be a little bit more. I need to take this hood off and see what it looks like. But this is enough. I think I should be able to determine what to do just from this front. I just feel like there's a very clear outline here, but I'll deal with that shortly once its color has been defined. The meat is looking better. It looks good. This is about a good spot that I think I'm going to stop increasing the value. It's working. I forgot to fix this little issue here, so I'll fix it when I go back this time. And it looks like the opacity that I'm picking for this cheese is not enough, or I'm not going light enough with my value because it needs to be a very thin film. And I want to determine how thin it's supposed to be before I pick the color. So this is just an experimental color on the surface. So I do need to go back and dial this down a little bit more. So I'm going to come in here and I set it to 40. Now I'm going to try to go even lower, maybe a 20, and see what impact that has. Actually, to really test it, let me just go with a 10 and see if that really does the job. Yeah, I'll start with a 10. And now I'm going to come and fix this issue that I was just talking about. Yeah, these gaps are a problem. So they do need to be filled. What I'm going to do is just take the top off every once so often, so I know where they are. It's this bleed. And I'm going to use my cement brush. So I'll just look here. Maybe I should be able to fill it in okay from here. Yeah, I should be able to fill it in. Actually, I'm just going to hide this and really try to just go around and just do the safe thing and just fill it in like this. All right, so that's it. That's enough filling in. I should not see any gaps now. And it's time to go see what these changes look like. Okay, so it's time to take a look at the results after all these changes. I went ahead and duplicated my light source and spun it around to get 4 different light sources so I could see this thing all around. And I have quite a bit of things that I have to deal with after seeing the results. So let's take a look. So the first thing I tried to do, this is my render. I'm going to bring this up occasionally to make a comparison. But what I focused on doing was trying to get this color right, because now I have the correct intensity of it, but I had to get the color right. So I managed to get a good color that represents the liquidated cheese. And it seems to be this particular HSV value. So I'll store this value and make sure I paint it exactly in Substance Painter. But before I get to that, I want to reevaluate something that I've done that maybe I went too far. And it was the lightening of this part of the meat, the medium part of the meat. When I look at the reference, I see that I perhaps might have gone too far. It feels right, but I think maybe just a little bit lower. So I will make that adjustment to fix that. The next thing I have to do is, just for safety purposes, I need to define a transmission weight for this fluid mesh because it doesn't have one, right? It's just doing whatever. It's just a blank UV tile. And since it's in UV tile 1002, I need to define it. And I need to make that definition along with defining color. Once it's defined, I can define that transmission weight. Then I don't have to worry about any of this base color that I've picked that is echoing into the liquidated cheese. None of it is going to come up here because when I set this, this will be a full transmission of 1. So that means it will disable base color. So that's something I have to do. It's very simple. I could do it in Photoshop, and because it's just going to be 1 color value, I can make it a 1 pixel map and just set it to 1. Just a pure value of 1, and then it will be plugged. It will obviously come into this transmission weight and basically disable all these other properties. Now, another problem I'm running into is after doing the all around, this is when I realized things were too dark. But as I start to go around, I realized that I really do need to modify this liquidated cheese. A lot of it is just riding too high. If you go to the back, You see, it's just going too high. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Even though, actually, it's possible because this liquidated cheese is coming down and it could go this high. But I just think it's just a little too high up. So some of these areas need to be regulated. This one in particular is just too much, right? It doesn't feel like valid that it could have come, all the liquidated cheese could have come all the way from up here and then ended up over here. And even in my reference, it's just, there's actually not that much at all. It's me putting it over there just to help get a nice transition. So I'm going to try to minimize it. Like here is where you have a fair amount of it and it is sitting in the corner. So I need to try to echo that. And here it's really small. It's like really thin strands of it and the fluid takes charge more. And I'm going to talk about the fluid mesh and something I want to do, some geometry changes, but I'll get to it shortly. So yeah, after looking at it, I'm definitely going to go in and erase a lot of it so that it is confined to certain areas. Another issue I'm seeing is how some of the bleed is looking like. Like here, the bleed of the top sauce onto the patty looks really nice. It looks really realistic, right? In the front though, when you go to the front, I feel like I might have been a little too overambitious. Let me see if the back is that bad too. The back is not bad at all. I guess that one because you can't see too much of it. And this one is fine too. It looks cool. In areas like here, this is the left side. So this is definitely something I should try to erase. Right? It's just coming down a little too much. It looks too disconnected and it looks too contrived, like too intentional, like very clearly painted. This side maybe not that bad, but here I suppose maybe because of that gap it looks weird. Yeah, it looks like really some weird striated look, but in these areas it's not so bad. It just really works to blend. The front is definitely needs to be dealt with. This is bad, so I'm going to go in and do some erasing here too. Another thing I want to deal with is this cucumber. When I look at the reference, my cucumber has a little bit more of occluded data. I'm just too bright here and it's washing out the detail. It might also be because of my subsurface scale for this cucumber. So I'm going to go in there and see if I should reduce the subsurface scale or go to my aocentric map and just make it a little tighter so that the occluded areas pop out a bit. So that's something I have to do. The other thing that you can obviously see is that this fluid mesh needs a lot more abstract painting of the opacity map, because right now you can very clearly see the outline of where it starts and stops. Right? I think it's also visible here. Like this is a one that shows it too. You can very clearly see that line. So a lot of painting has to be done. Like here it's really bad. You can very easily see it. So that opacity map has to be staggered a lot more to get some better results. Another issue that I'm seeing that I don't know if I should work to change is my top bun. I like this top bun. It looks cool, but it does look different from what I have in the reference. And in some instances, it doesn't look good at all. Like from this view on the left side, those flakes that I put in, the modified normal map, it doesn't look good. And I think at the very least that should go. This little bumpy thing here, it doesn't look too good. Right? Especially since in the reference, just have like a really flat bun, really smooth bun. And I think I lost it when I brought in those flakes. Those flakes are making it a little too busy. So I'll start by disabling that to see what things look like. And another issue I'm seeing is with these charred onions. They don't look too bad, but over here, there looks like a very clear transition point, and I don't like that. I wanted it to be a little bit more staggered. I'm also noticing that my SSS scale for the light part is too much. It's looking a little too translucent. So the SSS scale does have to come down, and this little black part probably need to change the color value to just a darker purple, or it needs to transition a lot better. But it's just too much of a harsh transition from this to this light, not charred part with the high SSS scale. So I'm going to make some modifications to these charred onions hanging out because they're not looking like charred onions too much right now. And another big issue that I'm seeing is related to my charred meat. Now, all around when you look, you can tell they look, one, a little bit too disconnected. They're isolated, but the other big problem is that they're too big and there's too many of them. If I look at my reference, they're significantly smaller. There's pockets where you have large ones, but everything else is really small. And I think that when I created it in ZBrush, I didn't have as much randomization as I thought. So a lot of them look like they're the same size. So what I want to do is paint a lot more of it, really small dots, and modify the geometry by just deleting some of them. It's just too much. Every view you look in, they're large chunks, almost the same size, and just too many of them. So I need to delete a whole bunch of them and just replace them with smaller versions that are more along the lines of this size. All right, so I'm going to duplicate this charred meat mesh, however many they are, and just start deleting some of them because I have too much going on. And the other thing I want to do related to geometry changes is the slack of the fluid mesh. So what I mean by that is if you look over here, because of slack, it allows the fluid to feel thicker. And by slack, I mean how much it's elevated off the surface it's sitting on. If it's just wrapped around the surface it's sitting on, it just feels like a skin wrapped mesh. But when you pull it out and loosen it up a bit, like if I was to pull it out with a soft selection tool, I'll get different shapes that don't make the fluid mesh echo whatever is underneath it. And I think areas like this need it, this little pocket here, because if you look at the reference, you see over here, you see the fluid is very thick. It looks like the fluid is draping over the meat, and the meat is so much farther behind. And I want this kind of effect in areas like this, especially at the bottom side, because the bottom is supposed to be drenched in more fluid. So I think by pulling it out, I'm going to start having some of that effect in some of these areas. Like this really deep area here, I should really consider pulling out the fluid mesh with a soft selection tool. I don't think I need to alter the displacement. I'll leave the displacement alone. It'll just keep the interesting form detail, but it'll just be pulled out a little bit more. So that's another geometry change I want to make. So the first geometry change will be the charred meat, reducing it, and then modifying the fluid mesh. And the last geometry change I want to make is related to how off I am as far as comparing this result to my final reference. So if I put my final reference on the screen, you can tell it's a lot flatter. This is not a change that I'm going to make permanent. What I'm going to do is, just for the sake of matching the reference, I'm going to duplicate this entire thing and use a lattice to squeeze it down just a little bit, just so I can match what I'm seeing in my reference, or scale it in the X and the Z, just so it's wider rather than taller, just so I can have something that when it's side by side with this looks close to my reference. And it'll just be a duplicate inside the Maya file. So if you ever want to return to this larger size, just hide it, and then you'll have the original that you're seeing here. But I'm going to do some scaling down or scaling out, just so I can get this more stoutier look. All right, let me get started with these changes. What I'm going to do is make this the last pass of reviewing and making changes with you. After I render and I come back, if there are any other changes, I'll go get them done and then come back when everything is done and complete, so we can wrap this up and I can talk about what files are going to be distributed to my Patreon subscribers who will have access to this. All right, so it'll be a good way to wrap this up, because I'm sure I'm exceeding the lesson time. I don't want to go over 2 hours or 3 hours. All right, let's get started with these changes. So in preparation for this second transmission weight tile, I'm going to name what I have right now. I'm going to call it Actually, I'll just leave it as transmission weight and give it the UDIM label 001. And I'm going to create a new PNG in Photoshop. I'm just going to make it, first let me change the canvas size and make it say 500 by 500. Or actually I could just go straight ahead and just make it 1 pixel by 1 pixel, like that. And I'm going to proceed. And this is all I want, just this. And it should have a pure value of white. So I'm going to make sure that it's set to white, which means full transmission. So I'm just going to take this and fill it in with white, which it's already white. I think it's fine. And I'm going to save this as a PNG. And there it is right there. This is my original. So I'm just going to save it as a second tile so that it reads this 1 pixel map that I just created. And go OK. Go back to my Maya file and make sure that it reads it. So I'm going to go here and make sure I set UDIMs and load in the new labeled UDIM tile. I should be able to pick that and it should read both of them. Yeah. So it reads both tiles. And I do have to remember to make this a raw map. It's just a black and white map. So that should resolve this thing getting any color, because it should be fully transmissive. It should not be using any color data from the rest of the shader. And if for whatever reason it's still getting color, then I'm just going to have to come and define colors for both tiles and funnel a second color into the second tile. I'll probably do that in Photoshop too. Just create simple 1 pixel maps that tell it to be this color that I've picked for here, and over there white. But I think I should be fine. This is full transmission. This is varied transmission, and that's why the color is peering through. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is start dealing with this hiked up value for my meat. So I'm going to come over here. And I remember going in here and just really pushing these. I'm just going to come down just a little bit, maybe to about there, about a cursor height down. Then the next thing I'm going to do is start fixing this bleed. So I established that in the front, it's just really bad. So I'm going to go up here and in the front here, make sure that this is in fact, yeah, this is the front side. Should probably turn off this fluid mesh so I can see better. And I'm going to start dealing with this bleed here. It's just too bad. So I'm going to start erasing a fair amount of it. This isn't too bad in the side, but down here, this is the big problem area. So we'll go to the side. This is a big problem area. I'm going to get rid of that. Yeah, most of the bleeding is not too bad in the back, so I think this is going to be fine. All right, so it's time to deal with these onions. The first thing I'm going to deal with actually is its SSS scale. I'm going to reduce this value. So I'm going to come over here and this white core, I'm going to bring it down to about there. So this should be a good SSS scale. And I'll do the same for the cheese. The cheese is too high. It's just producing this weird result. Bring it down to about there. So that's the new SSS scale. And now it's time to move to the color. And it looks like I did in fact have a purple tone. It's just maybe not at the core. It's just maybe a little too dark. Like it's not purple enough. So let me move up to about there. Always have to remember with a PBR, there's a limit to how dark you can go and how light you can go. You can go a lot lighter than you can go darker, and I think as far as like value or something like that, you should be above the 1.10 mark. So the closer you go up, the better. We don't want these pure blacks and pure whites. It makes things unrealistically dark. So I think this is good, but another thing I want to see is variance here. So I'm going to use my cement brush to dig in just a little bit, just to create some different variations down. I won't alter the SSS map just so it is slightly different, but I just don't like this all dark on the tips with no nice gradation. Like I want like an interesting mix of gradation, and I think this should do the trick. All right, so that's the minor fixing that I'm going to give these onions and see what the results look like. All right, so it's now time to deal with this fluid mesh, and how badly some of this stuff is riding up. In order to work with this, just so I can see better, I'm going to put these back at 100, and then I will put them back at 10 and turn on the invert pass when this work is done. So judging from what I'm looking at over here, I have a lot of this stuff all over, so I said I'm going to tone it down all around. You know, it's just excessive. I went too far, but it's good that I started somewhere and I can just dial back. So I'm going to start with this one right here, and I'm going to use my cement brush to just dial back. It's more important that I dial back how much of it is on the patties. That's really the issue for me. How much of it is bleeding on here. All right, so I think I'm gonna look at this and see what this yields. So I'm gonna set these back to 10. Turn on the invert and push this out like I did previously and see what it looks like. All right, it's time to move on to this fluid mesh. As I mentioned, it's not interesting enough. I can very clearly see the separation line, and that also has something to do with the fact that I don't think I have a pure black value at these edges. But I do want to make it a lot more interesting. Let me go to it and yeah, get some paint work in there. I'm going to take my basic soft and I'm actually going to go into the UV view and just make sure I have like a black lip all around, just so there's no chance of anything peering through. I'm going to do the same thing here. Go for a pure black value. Alright, so that should sort that out. And I'm going to go to my dirt brush, which is what I believe I was using here. And I'm going to try to go for a more staggered result here. Like that. Yeah, I think this is a lot more interesting. And we'll just keep that highlight confined to this core area, which is where I want it anyway. All right, next thing I want to do is deal with the occlusion of this cucumber. I did say that it doesn't have as much occlusion as it should. So I'm going to come over here and see if I can start with the aocentric map. So I'm going to come down to here to the English cucumber. This looks like the painting I did for it. This looks like it's, yeah, this is its core aocentric shading. And I'm going to come down here to the stack that I have here. And I'm going to see if modulating this balance value is going to help. It's at 0.37. Not really. Let me try the levels. Let me try this contrast value. Yeah, this contrast value seems like it's doing the trick. When I bring it all the way down, it's here. Up, it has a lot more interesting color in the occluded areas. It just stops it from being this like flat value. So let me crank it up. Yeah, and have a little bit more contrast in the shading. So I think this is it. I'm going to dial this up in the black and white spots map and see how it echoes onto the final one. All right, so now it's time to get started with these Maya changes, which are mostly geometry changes. So before I get started, I'm going to make sure that all my geometry is where it needs to be. I think there's one more mesh here that should be inside. This new fluid mesh should be in this group. It's very important that it comes over here because it's going to have some changes very soon. I should probably put this in here too. This is eventually going to be deleted. I just like to put delete just to remind myself not to delete it too soon. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is grab this fluid mesh, this main fluid mesh, and duplicate it because I do want to keep the old one. Call it old and hide that. And this I suppose will be my new one. And I'm doing this because I'm going to make some changes that I don't want to necessarily commit to. So it's about creating that slack so that I don't have a form-fitting fluid mesh all over, especially at the bottom where there should be a lot more fluid, thicker wads of fluid at this base here. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to pick a face, go into my soft selection mode and use B to control my region, my selection region. And I'm going to grab an area like this, and to help the fluid feel thicker, I'm going to move it out. So I'm going to be moving these out. And just to monitor my results, because this is definitely something I should be monitoring, I probably should have gone into the render tool, go into my perspective and hit play so I can monitor these changes. So I'm going to contain my changes to this region, move this to the side so I can see what's going on. And this doesn't have my new transmission weight map. So all the newly painted stuff is not in yet. So these are just geometry changes that we're going to have to wait to see how they look like with the new changes. But I think I should be able to monitor what is going on here as far as creating that slack. Yeah, so it's working. It feels like a very thicker film of fluid. Let me see if I can grab my sculpting tools, and if I was to do a smooth, what would happen? Let me store this and make sure that my... Okay, so I brought my brush size down, and I'm going to and just try to smooth. Yeah, just to smooth this out so it doesn't feel so lumpy. And let me see what the results are, if the results are significantly different. So this is without the smoothing that I just did. And let's see with the smoothing. All right, so comparing both. Yeah, you're still going to have some of the lumpiness from the displacement map, but the smoothing does help to simplify it a little bit. It's not that big of a deal to keep the lumpiness. I think it'll work fine. It still looks like a thick wad of fluid. But the changes is negligible because the displacement map is still there. So I won't bother with smoothing, but I will pull them out. So let me move on to the next region. All right, so that's enough altering of the fluid mesh. Do some more after if it needs to be done. And the next thing that I wanted to deal with is these charred bits and how there's just too many of them. So this charred meat here is just so much, and there's really no efficient way to reduce the count. I'm just going to have to do them one by one. So I'm going to duplicate these, call this old, hide them, and just, I suppose, go in here. I don't really mind on the meat. On the meat, they're doing really well, but on the, yeah, it's pretty much this one down here that I want to reduce. I think this one I'll let be. This on the meat is fine. So the top one I'll let be. So I'll delete this duplicate and bring this back and focus on the one down here. Right, there's so many and they're just so large. So I'm going to isolate and then just randomly pick some of them and just start hacking away. Just delete. Alright, so I gutted most of them. If I show you the old one, just put it on a layer. You can see how much has disappeared if I have both of them selected. and I just start hiding it. See, I've pretty much taken away almost all of them. A lot of them are gone now. All right, so now we're going to rely on paint work to get really smaller copies of them in there. So I'm going to keep this one hidden. And now in substance, I'm going to try to add my new changes, my new smaller pieces, without actually updating the mesh. I think I should be fine just putting in the data by hand without seeing an updated mesh. Actually, no, perhaps I should bring the mesh in here. So I am going to come back, update the FBX file with the new charred mesh file, and I'll just hit update and get the new mesh so that I can paint better. But I'm going to be over here. Let me hide my fluid mesh. So I'm going to be mostly on the sauce and the cheese and painting in my new charred meat pieces, or adding them to, yeah, this layer mostly, this dirt 3 layer. I think that's a good place to put them, at least on the cheese, and I'll go figure out where to put it on the sauce. All right, so this is the new FBX file. I've brought in the new charred meat, significantly reduced char, and I've hidden the old one, and I'm going to export this and update the substance file and start this paint. All right, so here's the updated substance file with the new FBX that has imported in the new charred mesh. Perhaps these really large ones too need to be reduced. So anyway, I'm going to start on the cheese and start thinking about how to cut these up. Let me find out the first place I put them. Okay, so this is the really sandy version that I did, really small. I have a second pass. Yeah, this is a good pass to go on, this dirt 3. This personality pass was not bad either. This one, I might have been a little over ambitious with this one. It's really a lot. As a matter of fact, with this one, this personality pass, I think what I should do is make it a better transition pass. So I'm going to make it lighter. Let me see what it looks like. Yeah, it's still really prominent. Let me actually undo that and see if just reducing its opacity. Yeah, reducing its opacity works a lot better. This is fine. And I'm just going to come on this dirt, add a new paint pass, and then go in there with a really basic soft and just go in there and start adding in smaller pieces, and just be careful not to repeat the previous problem of just having these very equally spaced and same size. Yeah, this is one of those things that I just feel like it has to be done manually to really get some good results. Yeah, that looks really nice. And then I'm going to go to the bottom bun and find that pass. Yeah, this one is simple. It's right there. As a matter of fact, with this one, I might need a new one. I think I might have put them on. No, this one I'm going to reduce its opacity just to get a better blending result. And then I'll just duplicate this. Add a black mask. add a paint layer. Make sure it's very dark, like the ones that are there. And then go in and do the same thing, just and I might have picked a color that is a little wrong. Let me go. Yeah, that's closer. All right, so I think this is good enough. This is enough of a change and baking of the charred meat into the bottom bun and the cheese. So I'm going to export these color maps too. Okay, so there's one more change to make now. And this is a very dangerous change because I'm going to be skewing this geometry. That's why I don't want to do it on the original. So I'll make sure that I hide the original and just do this on a duplicate. So I'm going to duplicate this entire group, move it up here, call it Cheeseburger lattice deformed. I'm going to hide my original. And just to be on the safe side, I'm going to check to make sure that all my geometry still has its Arnold settings. That's something, yeah, it's fine. I'm a little conscious about. Okay. And then I'm going to go into the rigging tab under deform, and I'm going to add a lattice. And it's going to be a lattice type 1 by 1 by 1. I just need a very simple lattice. I'm going to go apply. I'm sorry, you can't have a 1 by 1 by 1 lattice. I think at the very least I need a 2 by 2 by 2. So yeah, I might have been. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to isolate this lattice just to make sure I'm grabbing only its points. Grab the lattice points at the top. And I'm going to grab this thing and scale it down. Again, this is a very dangerous change. It's not something, because it is skewing the geometry, but it does make it look as close as possible to the reference. Flattens things out. But I know most of you don't probably care about this matching the reference. So when you get this, if you don't care for this version, just hide it and go back to the original. I'll just create a layer. Let me delete all these layers. These are my measuring tools. I'll probably delete them. They're just intended to show that this is real world scale. I'll just leave them over there, but this is the original. And let me just unhide it. And this would be the Cheeseburger deformed. All right, so let's take a look at what these renders are going to feel like. There is one more thing I forgot to change, and that's, I'm gonna go to this top bun. And if you remember, I had a switch that was going back and forth between my flaky displacement map and my non-flakes. So I'm gonna go back to 1, input 1, so that I get the one without the flakes. And I have to also go do that with my normal map here. It is looking at input 2. I want it to look at input 1 without the flakes. All right, so I'm gonna give a few renders and come back and see the way things are looking. Here are the final render results. I've assembled it in Photoshop, and I'm very happy with what it's looking like so far. There is one thing that I'm going to completely discard, and that's the altering of the fluid mesh. I'm going to show you what it looks like with the unaltered mesh versus the altered mesh. So what you're looking at right now is with the unaltered mesh. If I turn it off, it's not doing anything particularly special. I thought it would be looser, but I think to expect it to feel more fluidy, more thick, I would have had to go to ZBrush and make the change to the actual fluid mesh there and re-export it from ZBrush. So if you want to do that, just request the ZBrush file and I'll be uploading that. I'll talk about that towards the end. But yeah, I don't really care for this. It's not doing anything special. And actually in some areas it's ruining things. If I go to the back view, we can also make a comparison. And yeah, it is doing what I want to some degree, but it's just, it looks cheap, right? This is not how to properly go about it. It might be working over here, but some of these top areas, even this, it doesn't really feel that good. And let me look at the left side too. I think also be evident. Yeah, there isn't anything particularly special about it. It does feel like larger lumps of fluid. And this is the front. Yeah, nothing special. So I'm discarding the altered fluid mesh. I'll delete it from the Maya file. All that soft selection modification that I did is not necessary. But I do want to also show you another cool property that I turned on that's really making this thing look good. But if you don't want it, you can disable it. So what I did was enable coat. I did mention somewhere in one of the lessons that I would be piping some maps into coat, or I'll be utilizing it to get more of a specky look. So I'm going to turn on a render with coat so you can make a comparison. So there it is right there. It adds a lot of wetness to it and it feels a lot more fluid like. At some angles, it might feel a little bit too much. This is with the right side. Let's take a look at it with the back. So this is with coat on. See how much fluid, how much more fluid there is, how much more speckiness there is. It's really cool. And let's look at it from the left side. Yeah, very, very soaked, right? Maybe a little bit too much. So if you don't want it, you can always disable it. This is the front side. I think it really working here. I don't like what it does to this part, right? It drowns out too much, a very important detail for the patty. So I don't like what it's doing over there. But if you want to disable it, I connected maps into it. I created very simple 1 pixel maps and I connected it to the coat weight. So if we take a look at these maps right there, it's a fluid coat weight. So there's 2 tiles. For the cucumber sauce fluid mesh, I just wanted to make sure I didn't have coat. So I set it to a black value. They are very small maps, so you probably won't see it. It's really small. You could probably see a dot on the screen. And for the main one, you should see a white dot. This is as far as it's going to go. I can't really zoom in any further, but yeah, I'm just using 1 pixel maps to control code. So if you don't want code, just right click and break connection and just set the code back to 0 and you should have what it looks like without the code. And it looks like the flattening also makes it a lot closer to the final reference. So if I was to make a side-by-side comparison with the final reference, let me do an arrange, do a side-by-side. So it's a lot closer to the final reference as far as its size and proportion. So yeah, this is it. I'm not going to do any more troubleshooting. If there's any more troubleshooting, I'm going to postpone it and do it in a, I suppose, bonus lesson, but I could always keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, but I think it's enough. So I will be packaging what I have so far and uploading it to Patreon so that members of my Patreon tiers who are supposed to have access to this can download it. And when you get it, you can make whatever changes you deem fit. I'm going to show a few turntables, which I'm probably also going to show at the beginning of the video. And I wanted to render a lot more, but it's expensive. It took quite a while to render the one turntable that I have. But what I'm going to do is over the next month or so, I'll do some more renders and then I'll upload a bonus lesson with a final presentation of the final piece. I might have done some additional polishing, so look out for that last video that is presenting the final product. I want to thank you all for watching this course, and I hope it helped inform you about one way to approach a 3D modeling project like this. If you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the comments, and enjoy your summer holidays.